The night the king's banners snapped on the wind beyond the wall, Jon Snow stood on the bridge between towers and let the cold soak into his bones. Frost crept up the ropes like lichen on old stone, and the wall's great face shone with a pale, trapped light. Under that light, the world looked paired to the truth of it. No warm colors, nothing easy or soft. The wind worried at his cloak and slid under his gorget, and Ghost nudged his thigh, red eyes half closed as if the wolf tasted something new in the air and was not certain whether it was meat or smoke. Below, in the timbered yard that the builders had kept scraped of snow, men moved like small black stitches in a white cloth. Grooms led shaggy northern horses by the halter. Stannis Baratheon's pennons, the crowned stag and fiery heart sewn together by a queen's stubborn piety, slashed the air. Torches guttered, and the smoke went flat, refusing the sky. The king's men were building fires in the lee of the ring wall. They were not Night's Watch. They were not of the north either, not in their hearts. Many wore the look of men who had learned to win by the way of mail and the pull of legal writs, not by the etiquette of snow. Jon watched until the work's rhythm carried him from thought to thought. He was Lord Commander now. The vote had been a strange, narrow thing that left him feeling as though a knife had slid past his ribs with just the faintest kiss of iron. The order of the watch lived and moved through him now. It was in the way he rose before the first horn, in the dry taste of ink as he wrote, in the weight of the words he said and left unsaid. Duty had never been a banner to him. It was a rope held in two hands. You pulled or you were dragged. Footsteps stopped behind him, the sound changed by the bridge's hollow planks. "The king is ready to see you," said Melisandre. He did not turn immediately. Melisandre's presence was like standing before the heart of a banked fire. You forgot how warm it was until the thought of stepping away made you shiver. "Here on the bridge?" Jon said. "He is bold. Boldness is for men without other coin," she said, and her red hair lifted as the wind teased it. Her eyes were the red of old wine held up to a candle. "He waits in the king's tower. Then you have business with the wind that I do not," he said, and scratched Ghost's ear before he walked. In the tower Stannis had taken for his own, the fires were built too high. The room breathed heat like a kettle someone had forgotten at a boil. Stannis stood by a small table set with maps and pinned with iron nails, hands braced on either side as if he meant to pin the north to the wood. Davos Seaworth stood with him, thinner than Jon remembered, the lines of his face deepened by frost and the weight of a stubborn king. Queen Celis sat a little apart, a scroll in her hands, her mouth pursed like a seam drawn tight. Princess Shireen peered from behind them, half hidden, her small finger tracing a coastline of parchment as if it were a fairy tale road she might walk. "Lord Commander," said Stannis, his voice iron on an anvil. "The men of the Night's Watch are slow at coming to heel. They are slow at anything that is not their custom," Jon said. "They are stubborn as ice on a cistern. Keeps them from running when the snows come. It keeps them from bowing to anyone not sworn to the wall. Even to their king. Especially to their king." Davos's mouth twitched with something like a smile, or the pain of a tooth. "Your grace has not come for the watch," he said gently. "You have come for the north." Stannis's gaze did not move from Jon. "I have come to set the realm right. The north is a limb half frozen by treachery. It must be thawed. It must be made to feel again, and to feel rightly." Jon saw Winterfell as it had been under snow, smoke drifting from the kitchens where Gage cursed and laughed. Saw the yard where Arya shrieked with a wooden sword in her hands, where Robb grinned and turned and footworked with her until she danced away from the blade. He closed his eyes for the span of a breath. "Roose Bolton sits in my father's hall," he said. "He holds it for the Lannisters and for himself. He holds it for no man but the one in his own skull," Davos said, soft, as if it were a thing he had seen often in some other place and on some other coast. "Roose Bolton holds it because the north is a loosened knot," Stannis said. "The lordlings have split themselves like splinters under a nail. They are only brave when they can see their neighbors watching. Give them a name to gather to. Give them a lord to keep faith with or betray. They will choose. That is all men do in the end, choose." Your grace has a name to give them, Melisandre breathed. A name and a sword. Take both to Winterfell, and the snows will melt in their hearts. Sellis' eyes cut to the Red Woman, then to Jon, and when she spoke her voice was reeds and a string across them. A bastard cannot warm a snowbank. Jon met her gaze and let it slide from him. His temper had a slow fuse. Your grace, I am sworn, he said to Stannis, not to the queen. My life is the walls. My oath is plain. The realm is plain if a man will look. There is one king until he dies, and I am he, Stannis said, each word falling as if they had weight of their own. I cannot take your oath. The wall shall not have my oaths nor any man's. But I can release a man from an oath not sworn to me when the keeping of it undoes the very thing the oath was taken to protect. Jon felt the rope in his hands again. Pull or be dragged. How many times has that been done? Davos cleared his throat a little. There are a few tales, Your Grace. During the reign of Jaehaerys, I have read. There was a brother of the Watch called Thormund of House Faring, who was released by writ to take a keep in the Riverlands that would have fallen to the Ironborn otherwise. He served his days at the wall first, and when the need was met, he begged his oath back and returned half-frozen and older than his beard. A tale, said Sellis, tasting it and finding it thin. Men have died for less than tales, Davos said, and his mouth made that pained near smile again. Melisandre watched Jon as if the truth of him might rise like heat out of his skin. The vows are spoken to the realm, she said. You swore to guard the realms of men. If the king calls you to the place where guard is most necessary, are you a breaker to go, or to refuse? The wall is where guard is most necessary, Jon said. If the wall falls, the realm is not. But if the north remains the Bolton's carrion table, the watch will have fewer men and less corn. We will starve at our post and call it honor. My Lord Maester says honors like that are carved on stones because the men have none left to eat. Stannis' mouth moved. It might have been agreement. If the king names you Lord of Winterfell, he said, and Lord Paramount of the North, and if the king declares you a Stark of Winterfell, true and open, not in whispers by a bedside's tale, will the North remember their fealty? They will remember the wolf's head on the banners, Jon said. He heard his voice and could not decide, for a breath, whether he wanted to strike it to flint silence or let it run on and see if it gathered fire. They will remember. Some will spit on it because it is me. Some will bow because it is me. But they will remember. Then take them that choice, Stannis said. I will write the letters and heat the wax. You will ride with my letters and with my name and with your own. You will swear the North to me. In turn, I will make you what your father's blood deserves. I do not keep hidden what I mean to do. I mean to set a crown upon right. Jon felt Ghost lean into his knee. The wolf's heat was a live thing that asked him to think of snow that could burn. He thought of Robb with the crown on his brow, all that stubborn life spent at the Twins, and of his father with a sour smile when the wind took his hair and made a dark weather of it. He thought of Arya's laughter and Sansa's silk song, and Bran with his secrets to himself. He thought, am I the last leaf on a branch cut away, or the branch itself? He said, Maester Aemon should be present before anything is decided. Bring the Maester, Stannis said. Aemon came in on Gren's arm because the steps had begun to play him false, but the old man's face was as clear as the winter sky. Melisandre's eyes glittered when Aemon crossed the threshold, as if the flames had shown her a puzzle once, and she finally saw the last piece in a hand she had not expected. She watched him speak as if she could catch each word by the tail. Jon laid it all before the old man with nothing hidden, not even the way his heart hitched like a horse on ice when he said Winterfell, not even the way he felt the rope in his hands pulling him a little step along and a little step more. Aemon listened, his head cocked like a bird's. The clouded milk of his eyes turned to Jon's voice, not to his face. The Watch are not chattel, Aemon said at last, and his mouth tugged as if at some private mirth, as if he remembered a thing he was not about to say. Nor are they a field the king may plow when the season suits. And yet the vows were made for a purpose, and the words cannot be the lock that binds the purpose away from the work. In my youth, I read of men released from oaths in dire need, yes. The precedent is slim. Slim precedent is not no precedent. It is like a candle in a warehouse. It lights only one place, but in that place you can see to pick the lock. Bowen Marsh argued until his face went the color of cramped fingers. It is an abomination, he said. First wildlings in the gift, then kings in our yard, now stripping us of our own and dressing them in wolfskins. He is Lord Commander. He cannot set the cloak aside when it itches him. He can, Eamon said, and Bowen broke off at the quiet in the old man's voice. He can, and if he does, the watch will not be freed of him. Find a man to take up the same work with the same will, if you are so certain the chair will not go cold now. If you cannot, I advise you quarrel softly. The wall loves few masters. It loves men. The men do not stay unless they are kept. The room smelled of smoke and perspiration and pine. John did not look at Melisandre as he said, "If I take this offer, I take it knowing it is a wound. There will be men who call it treachery in halls where my father's name was spoken clean. I will take that wound. I ask the watch for leave, not because the king desires it, but because I desire to leave as a brother under the eyes of those I have called brothers." "Leave denied," Bowen Marsh snapped. "Leave granted," said Eamon. "The maester speaks for the watch when the watch quar." His mouth twitched again. "I am the oldest man here, Bowen. If wisdom clings anywhere, it clings like old ivy on my stones. He must go. The work calls him beyond the wall's shadow." Stannis did not smile, but something in him lifted like a hawk seeing a mouse. "You will have your writ," he said. "You will have your name. Kneel." John knelt. The kneeling felt like a fall down a slow well. All at once he was 16 again on the yard at Winterfell, bruised and laughing because Robb had got him in the shoulder with a blunted blade, and Jory was telling them both in his quiet way that bruises were the taxes boys paid to men. He fixed his gaze on the boards and did not look up as the weight of the king's words fell like links of iron chain. "In the name of gods I do not honor but must hear of, and in the name of the realm that is mine to guard, I, Stannis of House Baratheon, Lord of Dragonstone, by right king of the Undulls, the Rhoynar, and the First Men, Lord Protector of the realm, declare Jon Snow of Winterfell a lawful son and true by my will and royal writ, and name him Lord of Winterfell and Lord Paramount of the North and Warden of the North until such time as he should lay those things down or the realm should give better claim to another Stark of Winterfell. Rise, Jon Stark." The name struck like the flat of a sword. Jon rose. He did not know what showed on his face. He heard Davos breathe out. He heard Celis click her tongue softly as if a pin had pricked her. He heard Melisandre do nothing at all. He looked at Eamon and saw a strange look flicker over the old man's features. Relief and sorrow yoked together, like brother oxen that had known the same yoke for long years. Ghost's head came up. The wolf's breath steamed. "Right?" Stannis said to the scribe by the door. "To every lord who calls himself such north of the neck, tell Lord Manderly the king remembers his faith and will reward it. Tell the Umbers to come with spears and mouths closed. Tell the mountain clans that I will not forget their old freedoms if they do not forget me. Tell Lady Dustin that if she means to be a lady, now is the time to learn her courtesies. Tell Roose Bolton that I come. Tell him to have the kettle on when I knock." "You will sign them Jon Stark, Lord of Winterfell," Celis said, and there was a small mean pleasure in the detail. "I will sign them with my name," Jon said. "The rest will see to itself." After, when the room had become a place he could leave without leaving his will behind him on the table with the maps, Jon found Eamon seated in his cell with the door cracked to let the corridor's chill wash in. "You should have the fire built," Jon said. "You'll catch ice in your blood." "It is half ice already," Eamon said. He gestured weakly to the stool. Jon took it. The cell smelled of old parchment and rosemary, a trick the stewards used to make the damp less intrusive. "When I was young, I thought a man's life was a line with a beginning and an end. You crawled out of darkness and you went back to it after collecting what you could and throwing away what you must. That is not true. It is a wheel. You have been here before." Jon stared at the old man's wrinkled hands. I have never been named Lord of Winterfell before. Eamon's lip made a small movement that might have been laughter. Not that. Not the name. The choice. A chill that was not the corridors went through Jon then, dry as parchment. What choice did I make before, Maester? That I cannot tell you, Aemon said. I do not see any more than you do. But the feeling, call it the way smoke moves in a room when a door opens just a little. The air changes. A man knows when he has let in something that will not leave because it belongs. You have done that. You did it like a Stark would. You asked for counsel and then you chose without weeping over the cost. Jon bowed his head. If Bran or Rickon live, he said, because he had to say it somewhere that would make it real to him, I will not hold what is theirs. I will swear to them when they are found. I will, he swallowed. I will be a caretaker, not a kinglet pretending to be a lord. And if none live, then I will keep it until I die or someone better comes. There are always those who think themselves better. In the north, they will come with spears. Aemon's fingers traced the grain of the table. You will need men, and food, and a wife. A lord's bed is a table too, set for supper with the years. The words struck him sideways. He had not thought past the next day. He saw a pale face with hair like pale wheat, Val watching him across the common hall with the wildling's frank weighing of meat and soul. He saw a dozen other faces offered to him as if they were coins. He felt nothing but the tired pull of obligations he had not yet taken but would. I will take counsel, he said, because it was the bland thing, the clean thing. Aemon smiled. It was tired and kind. Take counsel with your heart as well, Jon Stark. Do not let the Red Woman take it from you because she thinks she can see the shape of a map in your blood. I have loved many fires. The only ones that kept me warm in winter were the ones I sat beside myself. Jon found Melisandre waiting for him in the corridor. You think I am a thief, she said, as if she had been standing inside the words he had not spoken. I am no thief. I am a mirror. The fires show what is already written in your smoke. He looked at her and did not lower his voice. Then you should know that if you speak of burning gods or men under my roof, I will turn you out of my doors in the snow and let the north decide whether it wants you. I will not write the north with ash. Your roof, her mouth curved. Then you have already moved into Winterfell in your heart. My heart has never left it. He stepped past her. Ghost's hackles brushed her crimson skirts as he went. The letters went with a speed that surprised him. Ravens winged south and west and east, carrying his new name. Jon stood at Eastwatch while Tycho Nestoris blinked his lashes free of a rime of frost and promised copper bought on the honor of a king and the iron of a city. He watched Tormund Giantsbane squat by a fire and hack a frozen joint of meat with a knife as long as a child's arm. You were snow, Tormund said, like a man marveling at some trick with cups. And now you are not? I am what the North needs, Jon said. And when he said it, he felt how the words fixed him into a shape he might not be able to unlearn. What the North needs is meat and furs and ought to put between men and winds that cut like a woman's tongue, Tormund said cheerfully. Your king will burn every sapling to warm his gods if you let him. I will not let him, Jon said, and Tormund shrugged as a man shrugs at the tide. He gathered a small retinue. A few of Stannis' knights came, hard-eyed men who knew the taste of hunger in their teeth and did not like it. Justin Massey, lank and better dressed than the snow warranted, because a man like that could not do otherwise. The queen's men sent some with him and kept the rest because their queen had a mind to see Weirwood's blaze, which they had not the numbers to accomplish yet. From the watch, men who had no vows left to cling to because the vows had been lifted, marrow and ache in that thought. Ed Tollett with his gray humor and a dozen others who would rather ride under a man they trusted than sit under a man they did not. And he took with him a dozen of the free folk, not as hostages but as men. They would take what they learned and tell it. He wanted them to see what the North could be with a hand so steady it held, not squeezed. They rode south first to the Crofters' village where Stannis had set himself to watch the road like a cat watching a hole. The king's camp clung to the shelter of wind-twisted trees, the tents hunched like old men. Men chewed loud at their dinners and spoke with the flatness of men who did not want to think about the morrows. When Jon sat with Stannis over a map spread on a barrel, Davos leaning one hip against the same barrel and doing sums in his head for grain and horse meat, it felt like the world was asking him to bet the hearth against the blizzard. "We go to Deepwood Motte first," Jon said, tapping the inked square. "Lady Glover's kin have been gnawed at by Ironborn long enough. You free robbers from a purse and you make a friend who can carry your coin." Stannis considered. "The Boltons will not come out," he said. "They are stoats. They will wait. So we strip away what supports them." "It is what they would have done had they wit enough," Davos said. "We must be their wit and their hunger both." They went in 2 crusts of snow and a scar of bare road. The march was long and the nights longer, men muffled in what furs could be had. Every morning, Jon made them halt a while for bread. On a high ridge ere the wind shaved your face clean and speech made your cheeks ache, they met a Glover scout who brought them to where Deepwood Motte squatted in the trees like a bear in winter, wounded and dangerous. The Ironborn had made the walls ugly with repairs and trophies. Jon watched the towers and thought he could smell salt even here, under the pines. They took it by night, not with the rush and cry a singer might set to a harpstring, but with the soft patience of a trapper who knows how to wait downwind. Jon went over the wall with a line of men who did not speak and killed a sentry whose eyes he saw go from bored to startled to gray in the space of a heartbeat. Ghost flowed ahead of him and came back with a strip of cloth flagged with a scent only the wolf read. When they had opened the gate and the men had come in like a deep breath, Jon found himself in the keep's hall with a dozen reavers shouting in their bellowing salt tongue, and the men around him a cautious ring that tightened like a noose. A woman stood on the dais, her hair shorn like a boy's, iron rings in her ears, wrists manacled. She watched the chaos with an expression so scornful it could have salted the stew. "Are you clever men then?" she said, when they had the reavers on their knees and the hall stank like old fish and new fear. "Clever enough to bring a key when you need one?" "Asha Greyjoy," Jon said, before anyone else could. The name tasted of sea that had drowned a dozen men he respected. Sister to the pretender who called himself king and put torches to the wrong things. "Clever," she said dryly, "and you are someone's bastard. I can smell the chip on your shoulder." Her eyes went to the direwolf that sat by Jon's knee, white and terrible in the torchlight. "And maybe not just someone's. Jon Stark," he said, because if he did not say his name often, he would forget it and have to be told. "Lord of Winterfell." Her mouth quirked. The world changes when a woman is in chains. Break these, Lord of Winterfell, and I will write you a thank you letter you can pin to your wall when you tire of the look of your own sigil. They freed her because she was worth more as a letter than a corpse. She stood and flexed her hands and did not thank them. She did not insult them either, which was its own sort of gratitude. "You will need ships," she said in the morning, when she found Jon on the walls, looking out at pines weighted with snow. "Not for the Boltons. They crawl too slow for ships. For something else. There is always something else when winter sharpens. That's a thing my uncles never learned. They thought there was only the next raid and the drink after." "We will have ships," Jon said, and thought of White Harbor and Wyman Manderley, and of the way the Fat Lord's eyes had beaches for stillness and something else for depth. The Glovers came through painfully, like a man set a bone. Men and women from the woods with hard hands and hungry faces. Jon stood in the yard and spoke not of oaths but of keeping their children from crying because the wind had clawed the last crust off the door. He did not say Stannis until later, by lamplight, to men who had spears to sell. When they left with 1,000 more hearts beating in their rhythm. At White Harbor, winter had muffled the waves, but the Merman's Court was warm as a chest you laid your cheek to. Lord Wyman Manderley sat like a mountain that had been given a seat. He listened to Stannis's letter twice over, his eyes half-lidded as if to give his ears more of the world. Davos handled the courtesies like a man picking bones out of stew. Jon stood and did not shift his feet and thought about meat and men and the price the city had already paid for cleverness. "You declare yourself a Stark," Manderley said at last. "By the king's word." "I declare myself a Stark," Jon said. "By my father's name. "A man could say both things and yet mean one," said Wyman, and his mouth made a small shape that might have been the ghost of mirth. Jon took the blow clean. "I will not lie to you. If my brothers live, they outrank me. If my sister lives and marries as a Stark, her sons outrank me. I am a steward, not a king. If I take Winterfell, I will not salt it for my children. I will keep the books in order so that when its lord returns, the accounts are clean." Wyman's fingers played with the edge of the arm of his chair. "In my youth," he said, as if thinking aloud to himself, "I learned that sometimes you put a fat man in a doorway because anyone else would be shoved aside. You are not fat. You are stubborn. Both can hold a door. You must decide if this is the door you want held," Jon said. "If you do not say so, I will eat your bread and salt and call it a courtesy and go on." The fat man watched him a while. "Bread and salt were never the best of what I had to give," he said at last, and clapped his hands like thunder. They brought wine then, and plates of fish with spices that made his tongue sing even after winter's dullness. Wyman raised his cup. "To Stark," he said, "and to the day when the North has no need to say which Stark." "Your ships?" Jon said when the polars had been fed and gone to their blankets, after Davos had told a story about onions that made the guards grin with their backs turned so their lord would not see them dishonored by mirth. "May be needed for something we have not yet the shape of. Hard home. A place for old bones and worse winds," Wyman said. "I have heard the tales. If you say the whites gather there like black flies on meat, I will send ships. I have heard stranger things in my time, and I have seen some proven in a worse light. I will say it soon enough," Jon said. "The free folk have a tale of it. We need them and they need us." "Free folk," Wyman mused. The words fit strangely in a mouth used to saying wildling like a curse. "Freedom is a heavy blanket, Lord Stark. Do not hand it to men who will sleep under it and take your bedding in the night. I will put them under my roof and feed them at my table," Jon said. "And if they steal, they will answer for it. Judgment is not less because mercy came first." Wyman studied him as if he were weighing a fish and wanted to be sure it was not bait. "I begin to see why the wall let you go," he said. "You would have sat in the chair and starved there because you gave away your bread. Or you would have fed yourself and starved alone because you were too proud to ask. Either way, the chair would have ended up empty." "Empty chairs go cold," Jon said. "And then men sit in them because they like how the wood looks, not because they know what the chair is for." Manderly's jowl shook. "We will make bread for your table, Lord Stark, and ships as you ask. Some things are best done when men stand beside you. I will not stand behind Roose Bolton. I am too old to bend that far." Letters went like birds flushed from hedgerows. Oaths came like snow, quiet at first, then the sound of 100 soft gestures making a roar. At last Hearth, Crowfoot Umber barked and spat and then clapped Jon so hard on the shoulder his arm was numb to the elbow. "You look like him about the eyes," he said, "and a bit about the mouth, when you're set on a thing and tired of hearing old men tell you what to be set on." He swore his boys and his old men and the women who could draw a bow colder than winter's sigh. He spat on Bolton's name and told a story that made 3 of the youngest throw up in the snow and feel the better for knowing. At the Rills, Lord Roger Risswell looked him over like a horse at market. "Bolton has the leathers in his hands," he said slow. "He has stretched them. They take a new shape. It is not pleasant to the hand, but a man grows used to what he holds every day." "Then set the leathers in the sun," Jon said with a thin smile. "They will crack and you can throw them away. If you keep holding them, they will take the shape of your hand." Risswell's mouth pinched. "You took a queen's bastard's name and made it less ugly," he said. "I will not take a bastard lord and make him more." "You will not have to," Jon said. "Take a Stark. The name is older than the quarrel you hope to keep having with yourself." They left with half a pledge and the promise that the other half would come in its own time, which was a kind of victory. From Carhold they got nothing but a diplomat's letter written by an old man's hand that said, in the polite phrases men used when they spoke of weather and funerals, that the Karstarks were loyal to their liege at Winterfell, by which he meant whichever man ate in the hall that day. Jon read it and folded it and did not rage. "They will come by night and pretend they came by day," he said to Davos, staring into the fire. "We will count them when they arrive, not before." Davos blew across his cup. "You have a head for sums," he said. "You have the kind of head that adds the numbers and does not add the hope as well. It is rare and costly, like a spice that spoils if a man looks at it too hard." When the pink letter came, it came in a glove that had the smell of an old stable. Jon read it once in the yard at Winterfell. He was in Winterfell now, because the doors had opened to him like a breath held too long. And once again by the light of a brazier in the great hall where the banners made a soft sigh. Davos stood at his shoulder. Ghost lay at his feet, head on paws, eyes open and still as ice. "Come and see," the letter said, and called him bastard and worse, and named the girl at Winterfell Arya and invited him to retrieve her if he wished to try his sword against a different blade this time. It called Stannis dead by freezing and sphere swear snarled words that made little loops like a child's string figures around the truth. It mocked, and under the mocking it sang of blood spilled like whatever passes for glee in a mind that cut its own fingers to see how it bled. Jon folded it. "We attack at dawn," he said. "You will not treat with him?" Davos asked, and his voice in that moment went back to the sea, where men spoke in the close tones of men who might drown if they were too extravagant. "I will answer him," Jon said. "Some letters are knives. You don't answer a knife with a letter." They did not attack at dawn. That is what he told the men, and he loved them for how their faces did not fall. They attacked in the dawn's mind, when the cold goes softer for a half hour as the world cannot decide if there will be sun. They had the river's shallow forks measured in their heads, and the drifts where a horse would fall to its chest and a man could go waist deep, and the scrims of ice that would bear a fox and not a man. Wyman Manderley had sent 200 men who moved quietly for their size. The mountain clans came like wind. You saw them last when they were already past you. The Umbers came with shouting and hit like a falling tree. Stannis came with a line that did not break because it forgot how. Jon went in with Ghost and the men of his household at his back. Not because he loved the look of battles, but because a lord's place is where men can see his sword. The Boltons came out. Roose had always been too cold for a true siege. Perhaps he thought he could cut a problem in half with one slice. Ramsay came bellowing at the flanks and blundered into a low place where the snow took his horse's legs, and his own men crowded him because he had taught them to crowd and shriek, not to wait. Jon saw him across a stretch of white like a page where someone had spilled too much ink and tried to blot it with sand. For a breath the world thinned to that, to the one man who had made so much of the world ugly by wanting things he had no right to want. He did not reach him then. Battle is never a line you draw with your finger. It is 1,000 men tripping over small pieces of fate. Jon's horse went down under him with a bolt in its chest, and he came up with snow in his collar and his sword in his hand and the taste of old iron on his tongue. The men around him closed and opened again like a throat trying to swallow. Ghost leapt and came away red-muzzled. The mountain men made a rush that looked like falling but was in fact art. They went down to their knees under the snow and came up thrusting at the soft places under mail. Manderley's men made small islands with their shields where the wind died and the cut had a chance to be clean. Stannis's line held and shook and held. Roose Bolton died because he was a man who thought he was a shadow. He had taught the world to look past him. A girl from the kitchens at Winterfell, Barbary Dustin's creature, some would tell it later, others something else, put a knife in his lower back in the press near the broken Sally Gate where he had gone to watch, and the knife found the place where a man's winter ends. His face went undone without fuss. The rumor of it went forward like a fever. Ramsay laughed when he heard it, the laugh of a mind that did not yet understand why his fingers were suddenly cold. Ramsay died because Jon Stark wanted him dead and because the world conspired to agree. The man came slashing forward while his horse flailed and air tore in his throat, and Jon met him even as the press opened an unlikely lane. The first touch of steel rang high and thin, the second struck bone under hair. Ramsay smiled when he bled and put a dagger under Jon's ribs that caught the ring of mail and bit at it like a dog worried a bone. Jon closed and felt heat at his belly and did not count the cost. They went down together in snow that swallowed their noise. Jon came up first. He put Longclaw through Ramsay's neck below the jaw where breath turns into voice and forced heaven's cold into him. Ghost's white skull came down once on a hand that held a blade, and then the blade held snow. Afterwards the noise went strange, as it always does. The big roar sinking until it sounded like 1,000 men with colds blowing their noses, a wet, exhausted racket. The banners that did not fall to the ground stood half in shock, half in wind. Jon leaned on Longclaw and felt his breath make black stains in the air. The snow was yellow underfoot because men are men even in victory. They went to the gates and opened Winterfell. The keep had the tense smell of a room that has been cried in after the crying is done. The people who came out were the sort of people who keep a castle alive. Women with chapped faces and men whose hands looked cracked clean through, and wizened old ones who had lived long enough to know when to come forward and when to remain part of the wall. Among them came a girl in a gray cloak whose eyes had learned not to expect kindness. Jane Poole named herself Arya with a voice that shook and then steadied like a deer that has decided not to run, and then confessed she was not, because she had expected to be killed for the lie and found herself alive instead. Jon took her hands, small as a bird's. "You are a Stark's ward," he said, slow so she could eat each word and not choke on them. "You were a child in my father's hall. That makes you under my roof wherever you go. We will feed you and we will name you true. We will not use your name like a broom." She looked at him and wept with the relief of a back set down after a long flogging. Davos turned away to scratch his beard, his shoulders stiff. Wyman Manderly blew his nose loudly on a cloth the size of a ship's sail. Men who had not eaten kindness in months went looking for barrels of it and brought back whatever looked like it might do. That night they burned nothing but trash and carrion. The weirwood in the gods wood stood with its face bared to the snow, and the snow did not stick on its leaves. In the great hall Jon took his father's seat and sat like a caretaker. The chairs around him creaked with men learning to sit under a roof again, to take breath without counting it. The walls listened. Banners went up. They were old cloth, brought from trunks where mice had gnawed at their edges. They were patched by hands that knew the shape of a wolf and a merman and a broken wheel. They were hung carefully like the dead. Stannis stood at Jon's right hand, because that was how men would read the hall. He did not smile, but his jaw was less set than usual. Celis came, and her mouth made the small, hard shapes of disapproval, and Jon let her have them because a woman must have something to hold in her hands in winter. Shireen came and looked about her wide-eyed, like a girl led into a maze that turned out to be 3 straight halls and a courtyard. Melisandre stood behind, the firelight doubling and redoubling in her jewels until it looked as if her throat were choking on bright blood. "You will do," Stannis said, when the bread was torn and the meat had cooled and men had begun to talk like men whose bellies no longer ruled. "You will do, Jon Stark." "Your Grace," Jon said and raised his cup. "The North swears to the king." The words did not change anything and changed everything. Men needed words as much as meat. Give them meat without words, and they ate with anger. Give them words without meat, and they starved politely. He gave them both and watched the hall breathe. Ghost lay under the high table with his great head on his paws and watched the doors as if expecting an old friend. In the days that followed, he wrote until ink crusted on his knuckles and letters went to places where men had once spoken Stark as a prayer and wanted to speak it so again. He married Alice Karstark to Sigorn of the Ven, and if 24 men muttered about free folk in a noble's bed, he ignored them and sent Alice to her new hall with 12 good spears and a wagon full of seed corn. He took counsel with Wyman and with Crowfood, who told him when to be rude and when to be rude with a little honey on it. He took counsel with Davos, who did sums aloud and alone like a man counting seconds between waves, and told him which ships were sound and which captains were only fat. He took counsel with Aemon by letter now, for the old man had refused to leave the wall, and Jon had not insisted because some men's lives belonged to the places that had held them up in youth. He took counsel with Val, too. She came into Winterfell like a white wind. Her hair braided with bits of bone and a strip of bright cloth Tormund had sworn once came from a woman notable for her knives. She looked at the hall with frank contempt and then at the godswood with a grave interest that made Jon forgive her both. "Your house has a stone heart," she told him, sitting on the floor and eating stew because chairs were for the weak. But that does not mean it cannot feel. The free folk say stone remembers feet. When men walk it long enough, it knows who they are. Make sure it knows your steps. It has known Starks longer than I have been alive, he said, with a smile that was not quite. That is not what I asked, she said, licking grease from her fingers. Make sure it knows you, snowman. He walked the godswood at dawn and dusk. He put his palm to the weirwood's trunk and spoke nothing, because nothing he said would be clean enough. He stood and listened to the slow drip of meltwater, even now in the cold, as if something in the tree was warmer than the air. He did not speak to ghosts. He let the ghosts speak if they had voices left. He never told anyone what he heard, because it was not in words. News came like winter birds, in flocks and single travelers, some with fat and some with nothing but legs. South of the neck, Cersei had done something foolish and then something else foolish to fix it. A queen had walked bare of pride and learned nothing. The Riverlands burned and went out and burned again. Of Robb there was no news, and of Bran and Rickon there were 1,000 tales, and Jon sorted them as a man sorts stones from beans. Patient, tired, not expecting to feed a haul from it, but hoping to save a tooth. At Eastwatch, men returned from Hardhome thin as paper. They came out of the fog, the Black brothers said, each in his own words that made the same hard music. And their eyes were blue as old ice, and there were too many of them. And we left men there, and we cannot stop thinking about how they felt when they were left. Jon did not sleep the night after he heard that. He sat in a chair that had been his father's father's, the wood polished by the regret of 1,000 hands, and watched the fire eat slow. He saw in the coals images he did not want to tell Melisandre, because she would think them prophecy. Men like her forgot that not all things shown by fire were put there by gods. He saw ships, and he saw the walls face black with things that should have been bones and were not. And he saw snow that did not melt because it was soul, not weather. He sent Wyman's ships. He sent them with men who had sailed in bad seas and come home not proud, only quiet. He sent them with free folk, too, because he had learned that a man who thought the waves were his cousins could go places in a boat a Lord Sailor would call impossible. He did not go himself. He wanted to go so badly he tasted copper. Davos took his hand and said, "The Lord who goes everywhere goes nowhere in the end. Pick your sea." The truth of it burned. He stayed. The ships went. The ships came back with half the men they had taken and 3 times more souls than the boats should have carried. They spat people onto the Eastwatch piers like a sea ashamed of what it held. There were children whose eyes had learned not to shut when it was wise to close them, and women whose hands shook when they were given bread because it was soft, not stale. There were men who had no hands and were surprised to be alive. There were old women whose mouths still muttered to themselves, counting the ones who had not climbed the gangplanks. With them came stories of how the fog had a sound, a whisper that put a man into a trance so patient he would watch his own death as if it were a play. With them came a man who said he had seen a king in blue, and that his crown was the frost that had killed his father's barley when he was a boy. Jon stood on Winterfell's battlements and looked north as if distance were a sheet and he could pull it back. "We will need more than swords," he said to Stannis. "We will need stone and fire. We will need to teach men not to run when the dead do." Stannis said nothing for a long while. "We do not have time to teach men anything," he said at last. "We will stand them up and let them learn or die." "Some things can be learned fast," Jon said. "Men learn to carry more when they think they have to. Men learn to keep silent when they want to live. We will teach them the rest with fear and food." "What do you want?" Stannis asked, flat, and Jon loved him a little in that moment for the way the king made a gift of that question by setting it on the table and not wrapping it in crowns. "I want you to keep your army in the north," Jon said. "I want you to write the Iron Bank and tell them their gold will be safest only if their king is wise. I want you to send letters to every lord south of the neck with this warning. Do not expect us south until the north is safe, and do not expect to be safe until you send men north. Tell them to feed us. Tell them to send grain by river and hoof. Tell them we do not ask nicely. Tell them the dead will not knock." Stannis' mouth made that small movement again. "You would have me leave the south to its farce. Leave the south to its south," Jon said. "We have the north. It is enough. You speak as if you were a king. I speak as if I were what I am, a Stark." That got a dry huff from the king. "Your father would have liked you," he said, and the words were the nearest thing to approval Jon had yet heard from him. "Or disliked me for being impractical," Jon said evenly. He liked that in men. It made him feel clean. "You have your fires," Stannis said. "Light them. I will hold the gates." Melisandre came to him the next day with a look like lightning under red silk. "You must let me see who you are," she said, and the hunger in her voice made it more honest than any plea she had yet made. "In the flames." "I know who I am," he said, and she did not flinch because he had not meant it as cruelty. "You do not know. There is a shadow over your name. I saw a man once in the flames whose face was two faces and whose sword sang when it burned. I thought it was Stannis. Sometimes the flames are unkind even to those who love them. I am not a girl, Lord Stark. I can be wrong." "You are often wrong," he said, and saw in the licking fire in her eyes a pain she would not show to anyone who could not bear to look at it. "Let me be wrong again," she said softly. "Or right. Let me see. The choice will not be yours to make in the end. Men like you are always chosen whether they want it or no." He stood with her at the brazier. He watched the fire and saw only fire. "I see a man," she breathed. "I see a wolf. I see a tower. I see a sword that is not steel and not fire. I see a woman with tears in her hair like salt. I see a boy with a crown of roots. I see a door. You will be a door." He did not ask to what. He was tired of doors. He was tired of seeing beyond the next one, of seeing that the room beyond was only a room, not an answer. The letter from Davos came at night with a man who looked older than the horse he rode. It smelled of salt and of the faint sweet of candle wax, and it said in Davos' neat, stubborn hand that the boy lived, and his name was Rickon Stark, and that Skagos was more knife than island, and that the men their respected knives. It said there were giants of the sort men made themselves into when they lived too long in the same story. It said that he would bring the boy if his ships did not turn to stone under him. It said, "Forgive me for writing the truth in a tone that sounds like a prayer." Jon read it and sat with it, cold, in his fingers, like a thing that had not yet decided to be blessing or bane. He slept badly and woke to the Godswood's face carved out by dawn. In the weeks after, he moved through Winterfell like a man learning both his own hall and the habits of a lordship that would not sit tame. He set men to rebuilding the outer walls with stone hard enough that fists would break. He had the smith work with a priest from the south and a singer from the woods in secret to make dragonglass spearheads that sat in baskets in a cold room, stacked like the black fruit of a dead orchard. He sent letters to the Vale in careful phrases that did not name Sansa but left space for a man's heart to read what needed reading. He walked the kitchens and tasted stews and told the girls there to put more barley in, less salt, we have men with injured tongues. He sat in judgment and handed out fines like thread and forgiveness like needles. He would rather men repaired their own holes than bought new clothes. He sat sometimes with Asha Greyjoy in a tower room and let her speak of seas as if they were people. "Men like my uncles think storms are stories," she told him. "They go to meet them with their chests lifted like cocks. A storm is a woman who does not know your name and does not care to learn it. You respect her or you drown." "And men like your father?" Jon asked, because sometimes a wound heals faster if it is looked at, and sometimes it rots. "My father loved the sea like a drunk loves wine," she said. "He did not see his own face in it. That is rare for men like him. He could have been a king if he had loved land better. I would have been something different if he had been something different. But we do not choose our fathers." "No," Jon said, and the word fell heavy and soft and rolled away somewhere he could not reach it. "You choose your sons," Asha said, and she looked at him in a way that made him uncomfortable, in a way that had nothing to do with desire and everything to do with expectation. "Choose them with your eyes open." Val laughed when she heard of the letter from Skagos and said, "A boy? Good. Lords forget their boy selves. You remember yours and you will not be a fool." She took to hunting in the Wolfswood with two of the clan boys, and came back with carcasses that looked like spirits' shed skins. She would not enter the sept that Celis had set up in a small chamber. For all that the queen had insisted on decking it with a Southron god like a child given a toy, Celis had a priest with a face like a knife handle. He asked to bless Jon's hall and men. "Bless without burning," Jon told him. "If you spill ash on my floors, I will mop the floor with you." The man looked to Celis. Celis looked to Stannis. Stannis looked to Jon. "Do as he says," the king said, and Jon felt the hall's stones settle a measure. Snow fell and fell again, and the world drew in on itself and learned its small arts. How to be quiet, how to bear weight, how to wait for light. Jon went riding, because a lord must be seen in the wings of his own hall, or else men begin to whisper that he is a painted thing. He rode with Ed and with Massey and with half a dozen others whose names he knew as well as the old songs. He saw crofts where men had set their children to watching nets for rabbits and where women told him, "Eat with us, my lord." With a pride that made him accept even when the bowls were near empty, he told the steward to send grain, not charity, alone. "Men keep their spines better when their hands are not empty," he told the steward. "If you loan them meat, they will bring you bread. If you give them meat, they will come back for meat. I want men who come with bread." When the whites came first for the crofters' village that had been Stannis' staging ground, men held because Stannis stood, and because there were dragonglass knives in baskets under beds. When they came for a hunter's cabin north of the Long Lake, they found a fire pit that had been salted with fat and prayers and a circle of sticks set with obsidian chips, and they went around it like a dog going around a thorn bush. Not all things worked. Too many things did. Only when a woman stood and called the name of her child, as if the sound alone could keep the dead from entering his mouth. Hard learning. Jon's hair went gray at his temples in one winter's span, and if anyone made a jest of it, he laughed because a man must, or else the laugh will come at the wrong time. When Rickon came, he came with Davos at his side and a wolf whose call woke the woods like an old debt. He was younger and wilder than Jon had dreamed. His hair uncut and his face a map of frowns that had never been asked to fold into something softer. He looked around the hall as if it were a story he had half heard and was not sure he liked. He looked at Jon as if he were not certain whether to trust a man who wanted to hug him and will himself not to. He stood with a stubbornness that made half the men in the hall bite back smiles, because there is nothing finer to a northerner than a boy who will not be moved by anything but meat. "Rickon?" Jon said, and the word hurt pleasantly in his chest, a stitch that told him he had run hard with something that mattered. "Are you my brother?" Rickon asked as if it were a trick question. "I am," Jon said. "I am your brother. Are you Lord of Winterfell?" "I am until you are." Rickon frowned. "I am. Then you are," Jon said. "I will show you the books. I will give you the keys. I will stand at your back until you grow taller than I am, and then I will stand at your side and bite the ankles of men who come between us." Rickon thought about that and made a face that wanted to be a grin and did not yet know how. "I don't like keys," he said. "Neither do I," Jon said softly. "We will find men who like them and let them live in rooms full of them, and we will take the rooms without keys." Davos watched them with eyes that had gone bright with the sort of satisfaction that is not perfect. Nothing on the sea ever is. Wyman Manderly sniffed loudly into a cloth and said, "There is a boy with the right bones." To no one in particular, Stannis stood and said, "The king acknowledges the boy," because he would not say "I," and Jon loved him again a little more for being the sort of man he was without apology. The next day Jon took off the ring of office and set it on the table where the steward did his sums. He stood before the men in the hall and raised his hands and said, "I was your lord, now I am your brother." They cheered because men cheer when a thing is both right and painful. They cheered because a man had done what he said he would do. They cheered because they had a boy with a wolf and a man with a sword, and both were Starks, and the word meant that food had a better flavor and the wind whistled less at the corners of a house. "Your Grace," Jon said to Stannis that night, "the North has sworn to you. It will swear to Rickon too in its bones. He is a Stark and more Stark than most. He will need guardians. He will need a teacher who can count. You do the counting," Stannis said. I will do the scowling. Between us, we will teach him to hate fools and feed honest men. Jon smiled despite himself. We will teach him to keep a ledger and swing a sword, he said. That would have pleased my father. Your father would have found fault with your ledgers, Stannis said, and then paid the bill. They stood on the ramparts and watched the night make the snow blue. Ghost went to the edge and looked out and down and up all at once, as if the world were a thing a wolf could put in his mouth. Far off, a long low howl went up and stopped the hall's breath. Shaggy Dog answered from the inner ward. Men started laughing, high and foolish with relief. The sound went about the yard like a spark. Jon led it and did not scold them for laughing at night. Laughing was heat. The days after set their own pace, not his. Word came from Old Town by way of Bravos that a maester had died on a ship and had smiled before he went as if he had remembered a thing no one else would ever remember now. Word came from the wall that there were blues in the woods and that men had set fires and watched them with swords out. Word came from White Harbor that Wyman had eaten too much pear tart and not enough prudence and had ended up in his bed with a smile and a cough and a doctor from the south who said words that did not matter. Word came that the last of the Freys had blundered into a pass where they thought the Umbers had forgotten the shape of trap-making, and that the Freys were now a story the Umber children would tell by the hearth when they needed to remind themselves that being thick was worse than being cruel. Jon moved through it all with the steady, slow stride that Winterfell taught its lords, and when he went to his bed, he slept sometimes very well and sometimes not at all, which is how a man should sleep if he holds other men's winters in his hand. Val came to him once with half her hair cut off and gave it to him in a pouch because she thought the gesture would carry weight with the free folk, and he took it and set the pouch under the weirwood because sometimes an old god needs a new thing to chew on. Asha came to him with a map of a coast no Southron would ever admit existed, and he sent a man to see if the rocks were where she said. Davos went and came back and went again. He had a way of going that made men think maybe going was not so hard after all. When the cold deepened and the wall sang, yes, it sang, you could feel it under your feet if you were very quiet. A song like stones ululating, Jon rode north again. He took a guard of 50 chosen, men who knew how to move quietly and hit hard. He took Val because the free folk would call him fool if he did not. He left Rickon with a council that had more will than wit on purpose. A boy must learn to push and be pushed. He left Stannis in Winterfell with a room full of letters and a face that made quills write faster. At Castle Black, the watch looked at him sidelong and then looked him full in the face because a man who looks down in the yard will look down when the dead come. Bowen Marsh had already gone south to look for fewer winters. Othel Yarwick had learned to say dragonglass without moving his lips. Dolorous Ed stood a little straighter than he had in years because the cold had made his spine forget what it wanted. Jon walked the yard and the hall and the frosted steps, and the wall watched him as if it remembered his footsteps. He spoke to the men and said, I am not your lord. I am the North. We are the same thing now. He spoke to the fires. He spoke to the rookery. He spoke to the shadows of the old cells where men had too often paid their frustrations forward and called it justice. When he left, the wall did not call to him by his old name, but neither did it leave him unnamed. On the ride south, a snow heavy as sheep's wool came down, and they were forced to make camp in a hollow where the wind curved around them like a hand. Val crawled into his tent without asking, because free folk do not, and set herself near the brazier. You look like a man who has been walking for a very long time, she said. I have, he said. I do not know where the path ends. It does not, she said. The path is the thing. You are a man who wants a wall at the end of his path with a door that says, you have done enough. That is a Southron thought. Up here we go until we fall down, and then we bite the man who tries to steal our boots. He laughed softly. I would have liked to have known you when you were a girl. Why? She said, curious and not coy. Because you must have been 10 times as fierce, he said. And I would like to see if men can survive such a sight. She grinned, a white slice of a thing. Men survive anything when they have to. You should know that, Stark. The snow quieted at dawn. They rode on, stepped from white to white, breath a living thing. They reached Winterfell at dusk on the third day to find the yard loud with two wolves calling to each other from the walls, as if they were ends of a conversation that had started before men had words. Jon looked up and thought of how sound carried over snow, and of how names carried in men's mouths, and of how a door is sometimes a man, sometimes a place, sometimes a choice. Shireen ran across the yard and stopped when she remembered how a king's daughter does not run. She stood and said, "Lord Stark." With all the gravity of a small girl who has been taught how to address men who could hurt you without meaning to, he bowed fully to the child. "Your Highness," he said, and the courtiers nearby smiled in their sleeves because men like that cannot help but be pleased when they see courtesy done cleanly. In the gods would he put his surest hand on the weirwood and closed his eyes. He saw not fire but snow, and not snow but a door carved in old wood, and not a door but a word. Men tell their own futures all the time, he thought. They say, "I will," and "I must," and the world moves around them like a patient horse. He opened his eyes and saw the red leaves bright as fresh cuts, and heard the creak of a branch ready to bear weight. Val's hand lit on his wrist and did not stay because she did not hold men who had not asked. "The free folk say the tree hears," she murmured, as if reluctant to disturb the god in his sleep. "Do your gods hear, snowman?" "They hear too much, he said. "Then say less," she told him and laughed, and the laugh went up into the leaves and did not come down. When the dead came again, they came across the long lake in a hush of fog. Men saw them by absence of wind. Jon set men in marshy ground with ropes and dragonglass heads, and they hauled and cut and hauled and cut until they were too tired to pant. The dead did not scream. The living did not either. The dead fell apart as clean as winter will let a man fall. Jon watched and thought, this is how it will be. Not one great day or one bright sword, but 100 small learnings hung together on a long, cruel thread. He grieved for the hero stories of his childhood. He grieved and did not look away. On Midwinter's Day, the old gods had the snow brushed from their faces, and the hall was hung with wolf banners and with the sigils of men who had remembered their oaths. Jon sat a little lower and to the left of Rickon, and when men addressed the boy, he answered first if he was able and looked to Jon when he was not. Stannis stood and said nothing, and by saying nothing said, "This is a Stark's hall. By my leave, by my need, by my understanding that sometimes a man holds a thing not because he wants it but because if he were to put it down, some other man would pick it up for the wrong reasons. Sometimes I do not know whether to thank you or curse you," Stannis told Jon, grave, later, alone, the words iron in wood. "Do both," Jon said. "It will learn you balance." Stannis looked at him. "You are no man's mummer," he said. "You have not once told me what I wanted to hear." "If men told you that," Jon said, "you would not be you." Stannis's mouth twitched, which for a different man would have been a laugh. "The realm will be as it will," he said. "I will send men. I will send food. I will sit in your hall and be obeyed. I will bite the hands of those who reach for what is not theirs. I will make the south quiet enough that the north can do its work. That will have to be enough until the dead come to remind us that nothing is ever enough." "It will be enough," Jon said, "until it is not." They stood at the window. Snow fell heavy and sure. In the yard below, girls chased each other with handfuls of it and screamed like geese, and were scolded by women whose mouths softened when they turned away. Men carried wood and called to each other in the appropriate scorn. For there is a way of speaking under work that keeps hands warm. Wolves called and were answered. The weirwood listened and made no sound, as gods should. Jon thought of the rope in his hands, the old image he could not shake. Pull or be dragged. He pulled. He felt the rope pull back as the world took its share, as it will. In his bed that night he lay alone and wakeful for a long while. Sleep came and went. Dreams came and did not stay. At last he rose, barefoot, and went to the window. Winterfell slept like a beast. A light moved in the godswood, high, as if stars had come lower for once to see what men did when they thought no one watched. He stood there until his feet hurt with cold and his breath made his chest ache. He thought of a door again. He knew he was the door, into the hall, out to the cold, into the book where sums were done, out into the yard where men fought because the world was the sort of place where men fought. He was not king. He was Stark. He would do. When dawn took the sky by the shoulders and shook the last pale, clinging night from its edges, Jon dressed in wool and went down to the yard. Men nodded and called him "my lord," and he answered by name. He took a spear with a dragonglass head into his hand and felt the balance. He showed a boy how to hold it so the weight was not all in the wrist. He took bread from the kitchens and tore it with his hands and handed it out like a miser who did not want to admit that generosity was a kind of coin that bought what he most needed. He watched Rickon scowl through a lesson and then smile when the steward made a stupid joke about crows and oats. He watched Val mock a man for lighting a fire badly and then show him how to do it with a patience that would have surprised anyone who did not know that cruelty and kindness are both sharp knives in the right hands. He watched Stannis read and sign and look up at the door whenever someone entered as if perhaps he would be offered the one message he wanted, "The realm obeys," and then go back to the work of wringing obedience out of it with quill and will. He could hear the future. It sounded like snow sliding off a roof, like wolves calling each other across distances men could not manage without aid, like boats creaking against piers, like men's laughter in a hall where no one went hungry by accident. It sounded like steel. It sounded like breathing. It sounded like the thing that had brought him to the wall as a boy and had brought him to Winterfell as a man. Duty that did not feel like a badge but a burden shared until it became a rhythm. He lifted his face to the pale sun and let it blind him. When the light went out of his eyes, he saw not darkness but red leaves and white bark and a little boy's frown becoming a grin. "Winter is work," he murmured, and did not know if he spoke to the gods, to the snow, or to himself. Then he went to work.